What if Trump forcefully seized the Panama Canal? Let's explore the depth of it in the video.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, the First Lady of the United States, and my fellow Americans. Let me tell you, this day, years ago, President Bush went down to Panama. He really went all the way to protect that country and strengthen America's standing in the world. Now, we've got to do it again. The people of Panama, they're our friends. Great people. Fantastic, really. You see them everywhere in our incredible country. But there are some, believe me, who don't respect us. They want to cheat us. They think they can break their deals and get away with it. Let me tell you, not on my watch. So, I'm here asking you, our fantastic Congress, to support a very important military mission to this small but very strategic nation. We need to secure the Panama Canal, so crucial for our ships, and bring it back under full American control. And if we don't, make no mistake, China will step in. And that, my friends, is not good for America. And it's not good for Panama either.
The room buzzes with a mix of celebrations and complaints. After a few minutes, Congress approves the American invasion of Panama. Just minutes after that, Trump calls President Jose Raul Mulino.
Mr. Mulino, we need to talk right now.
What is it you wish to discuss, Mr. President?
No time for pleasantries. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You've seen the reports. I'm sure you've got something to say.
My administration does not respond to rumors, Mr. President. Please state your purpose.
The canal. Our canal.
With all due respect, Mr. President, the Panama Canal is Panamanian territory, lawfully and internationally recognized. You know that.
That's about to change. I'm deploying troops as we speak.
That would be a grave mistake, Mr. President. You know the consequences. 15,000 ships, about 2 every hour, pass through the canal. 5% of global trade. Where do you think they'll go? And the U.S. depends on it for nearly 40% of its container traffic. Why disrupt such an important route?
I'm not looking to ruin anything, Mr. Mulino. I want fairness. You're letting China slip in behind our backs.
That's simply not true.
C.K. Hutchinson. Does that ring a bell? Ever been to Hong Kong? I have, Mr. Mulino. I'm a businessman, remember? I know exactly what's going on.
My government wants to negotiate. We can find a solution. C.K. Hutchinson's not an issue. If that's your concern, we'll remove them. But let's sit down first. We can share.
Now we're talking. What's your proposal? What are we sharing?
A 67-33 split, with a defense pact guaranteeing Panama's protection.
50-50, and a mutual protection agreement.
The people of Panama would never accept that. Our government would fall the moment we announce it.
That's your problem, not mine. Mine's China creeping in from both sides. You were supposed to be our friend, not theirs. We like the Panamanians in our country. Good people, really. But you're forgetting that. Are you listening?
We could arrange for reduced tolls for U.S. vessels under certain conditions. Is that on the table?
I want that, sure. But I also want the canal. America wants it. And frankly, I don't trust Panama's loyalty in a crisis. So, we're taking it, one way or another.
My country won't stand for this. You can't just claim it. There's a reason the United States left before, Mr. President. Ask your advisors. They know the history.
I've heard enough, Mr. Mulino. I don't need your advice. Negotiations are over. If you don't step aside, the military will handle it, and you'll deal with the fallout.
This is a dark moment for my nation, Mr. President, and I deeply regret it. But remember, in these situations, no one truly wins.
I always win.
In the next few hours, 30,000 troops and 300 aircraft invade Panama from all sides. For the initial invasion, the U.S. utilizes forces stationed at nearby military bases, primarily Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras, as well as Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The first wave, consisting of approximately 5,000 troops, is airborne by first light, parachuting into key areas near Panama City and Tucumán International Airport. A massive airlift of around 25,000 additional troops from the continental U.S. follows, with heavy transport aircraft like C-17s and C-130s delivering armored Humvees, tanks, and critical supplies. Facing them, the Panamanian military deploys its 20,000 troops, but they are outmatched in training and equipment and are scattered across the country. Resistance seems futile. Within hours, the U.S. forces push towards Panama City, securing roads and communication hubs as they advance. President Molino, in a dramatic online video broadcast from an undisclosed location, calls on his people to resist. Armed civilians and paramilitary groups soon emerge in densely populated urban neighborhoods and rural areas. The streets of Panama City become a battleground as U.S. forces face ambushes and sniper fire. Despite the challenges, the U.S. maintains a significant technological advantage, giving them the upper hand. Special forces units are quickly deployed to secure radio stations and key communication hubs, isolating the city from outside assistance. Meanwhile, combat engineers and Navy SEALs advance towards the Panama Canal. They reach the canal without significant resistance, but taking control of it proves far more difficult. The locks and operational centers are heavily defended by Panamanian security forces. The operation commander contacts his superiors at Soto Cano for further instructions.
Sir, we've reached the main entrance, but the gate and perimeter are heavily defended, requesting further orders. Engage with full force. Secure the canal at all costs. Sir, there's a complication. There are unarmed civilians inside, workers, and even some diplomats. Do we proceed with the strike? Understood. Hold your position. Surround the perimeter and demand their surrender. Make it clear that we will enter by force if necessary, but avoid civilian casualties. We'll coordinate with the embassies to ensure all international personnel are evacuated. The canal must be secured, but we need to do this cleanly. Copy that, sir. Moving into position now.
Hours later, after a tense standoff, the main building surrenders. Simultaneously, the U.S. Navy deploys amphibious assault ships off the coast, landing additional forces to secure other critical points along the canal, including the Miraflores locks. By midday, U.S. forces make significant progress in securing strategic regions around the canal and the capital. However, pockets of resistance persist, particularly in poor, densely populated neighborhoods and rural areas. As the initial shock of the invasion fades, the operation becomes increasingly challenging. After a day of intense fighting, the Panama Canal operations are firmly under U.S. control, but the situation remains uncertain. International media outlets condemn the invasion, and governments worldwide debate their stance. Most alarmingly, intelligence reports indicate significant movement by the Chinese fleet toward the Pacific. Washington watches and waits. Given the Panama Canal's global significance, reactions come quickly from all corners of the world. Expectedly, China makes the first move, condemning the U.S. for its aggression and taking the matter to the United Nations. They frame their Belt and Road Initiative as a peace project, ensuring freedom of trade and movement, contrasting it with the U.S.'s egotistical aggression that only brings the world closer to poverty and conflict. Russia aligns with China. While Moscow has shown little interest in the specifics of Panama, they seize the opportunity to criticize U.S. interventionism, pointing out the West's double standards. Other BRICS nations follow suit, issuing public statements or pushing for formal UN votes. Brazil in particular is a loud voice, with President Lula using the invasion to once again attack U.S. imperialism in Latin America. He calls for regional unity against what he frames as catastrophic American policies. Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, long-term U.S. regional rivals, align with these condemnations. In the corridors, their diplomats desperately seek military agreements with China to prevent similar actions against them. Cuba, in particular, intensifies diplomatic effort to deter Trump from considering military action on the island. On the opposite side, U.S. allies are far less unified. Argentina's President Javier Milei is the most staunch supporter. He firmly stands behind Trump, seeing the U.S. as the only power capable of countering China's increasing influence in the region. He announces Argentina's full support, echoing Trump's claims that the U.S. is the guardian of free markets and regional stability. But the rest of the allies do not sound so confident. Britain, given its historical alignment with the U.S., echoes Milei's support, but in a less provocative tone. With little to lose, the UK reaffirms its strategic partnership with the US, but falls short of supporting the invasion. For the European Union and Canada, the response is even more cautious. After Trump's recent comments on Canada's sovereignty and Greenland's annexation, both countries feel increasingly threatened. An invasion of Panama might not push them to break from NATO or directly condemn the US, but it makes many European leaders, especially in Germany and France, reconsider their diplomatic positions. Some think that a shift in EU policy might actually not be a bad idea. Many voters actually like the idea. But the real response comes from China, and it poses a real challenge. Hours after the invasion, China calls a blockade of Taiwan. Suddenly, the world is faced with two major crises, and nobody knows what comes next. Immediately, Trump calls Beijing.
You need to stop what you're doing now.
Our internal matters are none of your concern. We're simply protecting our national interests. What you're doing, that's the real issue, Mr. President.
Do you know American history, Mr. Jinping? Ever heard of an old president of ours? President Monroe? He said something back then, and he was right. Latin America is tied to our America. That's an internal matter for us, too.
Maybe it's time to change that.
Let's be honest here. It's American forces that guarantee the safety of passage, not Chinese. You care about the money, but it's our soldiers who protect it, and we're getting nothing in return.
I have nothing to say on that. It's between you and Panama, but the trade routes need to be open.
And the blockade of Taiwan needs to stop.
These are unrelated issues.
You know they're not. What are you trying to do? Threaten us? Do you really think you can just dictate terms to us? You're putting everything at risk, Xi. You've crossed a line. If you keep this up, we'll have no choice but to retaliate.
You are the one escalating this, Mr. President. You have no leverage, and if you take any action, we will respond. We are ready.
Then we'll see who's really ready, won't we? This is your last warning, Xi. One way or another, this will end with a price.
Very well. Prepare yourself for the consequences.
We will, and I promise you, China will regret this.
In the next few hours, Trump calls Vice Admiral Fred Kasher to prepare for the U.S. 7th Fleet in Japan for immediate engagement. He also puts the entire Indo-Pacific Command under Admiral Samuel Paparo on alert and orders the huge U.S. Pacific Fleet to move towards the South China Sea. Two massive fleets, loaded with aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines, move in swiftly with a clear message. The U.S. will not allow China to dictate the fate of Panama, nor that of Taiwan. A direct confrontation seems inevitable. At the same time, Xi remains undeterred. He cannot back down when what China considers its own territorial waters are directly threatened. A formidable fleet led by the aircraft carrier Shandong, accompanied by 4 large destroyers, 10 frigates, and submarines, is stationed in the South China Sea, ready to defend the area. Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier Liaoning leads the fleet blockading Taiwan to prevent the 7th Fleet's engagement. The movement of these 4 fleets makes global news. They are probably the largest military concentration in the world since the Cold War. Xi tries to contact Washington again, but Trump refuses to engage. In a bold move, U.S. Navy vessels seize Chinese ships attempting to cross the Panama Canal, sending a clear message of dominance. In retaliation, Chinese authorities swiftly seize American ships that happen to be docked in Chinese ports, escalating the crisis further. As tensions reach a boiling point, the Battle of Taiwan erupts. The USS George Washington, one of the U.S. Navy's most powerful aircraft carriers, releases its full might near the north coast of Taiwan, launching a devastating aerial assault on the Chinese blockade forces. The skies are filled with fighter jets as U.S. planes take off in waves, delivering a series of precision strikes against Chinese military assets, including airfields and naval vessels. From the south, artificial island bases in the South China Sea are destroyed by U.S. bombings launched from the Philippines. The outcome of the battle remains uncertain. It's likely that China, unwilling to risk its own security over the Panama Canal, will ultimately back down, exposing the bluff behind their aggression. However, there is also the possibility that China could persist for a time, revealing some of the US's vulnerabilities in the Pacific and potentially shifting the balance of power around Taiwan in its favor. The consequences of a US invasion of the Panama Canal are difficult to fully predict, but one thing is clear. They are likely to extend far beyond Panama itself. If you like this video and want to know more about a possible clash between the US and China, don't miss my previous video on what if China invades Taiwan.